Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. We're starting off 2022 with a fantastic guest, Yogi Sharp, not spelled with an E. Sorry about that. And Yogi's, but we've been haranguing trying to get Yogi back for a long time. He's known as the equine documentalist, and he has some really interesting things that he's doing. And I hope we can talk about some, not just the topic today, but some of the other things you're doing, because that anatomy bit that you've done, I really want you to talk a little bit about that too. All right.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
all right,
great.
So welcome and thank you for joining me, Yogi. So just give everybody a brief introduction for those that did not catch your first webinar, so that they kind of know what you're up to.
Yeah. Okay, so my name's Yogi Sharp without an E, and I am a higher qualified farrier from the UK. Just finished my BSc honours in farriery. I start my PhD early next year. And while I was studying for my BSc honours, I created the Equine Documentalist platform, which is basically, I saw it as a way of getting the research that's happening in the universities and sitting on behind paywalls on the internet and stuff like that, on Google Scholar and stuff like that, and bringing it to the wider population to enable better care of our horses from a scientific base. So that's what the Equine Documentalist was. And it just kind of, I initially started it just as a labour of love, just thought I'll share what I'm learning. And it kind of exploded. Now, we do webinars ourselves, and just lots and lots of education. There's so much free stuff on there. You can read all day long if you like.
Yeah, you do great posts on Facebook, and I always find them so fascinating because I love how you have, put lines and measurements on things, which I think that's a lot what you're all about, is really getting down to some measurable changes and things that we can all see because.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, objective measurements is a really big thing for me, because I think up till now, the industry has been quite, the farrier industry, as well as the equine industry in general, has been quite subjective in, that horse looks this or that foot looks that. Whereas I'm, very hot on, okay, well, actually measure that so that we can actually be a bit more objective and have a language and a way of communicating with one another that's not opinion, but, more factual. So objective measurements is a big thing for me, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So
yeah, and I just think that's fantastic because I'm a riding instructor. That's what I've done for over 30 years, and the thing that makes me crazy is that it's everybody's opinion about how the rider should sit, as opposed to actually looking at it from a measurable biomechanics perspective, which we do with every other sport, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's like, why don't we do that for the rider? So I love the fact that you're into putting some numbers and facts behind things, because I just think then we're all on the same page. Because, in riding, just because the horse is performing well doesn't mean it's optimum. It's just that horse is winning. And so what if that rider actually sat in a more functional way? How much better would it be? But we don't seem to have the political will to go down that track. Whereas at least with feet, I think that the hoof world has, over the past few years, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, I'm guessing, has really decided to take it to the next level with looking at things seriously and with measurable instruments and things like that, which is really fantastic to the benefit of the horse, of course. So, all right. So the title of your topic today is recognizing the ideal hoof and objective measurement. So we're right on track.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
Yep. And do you want to screen share, or how do you want to get started?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that, shall I?
Okay.
One sec. Share. Let me just make sure I pressed the right thing. Hang on. Oh, I can't see my.
Oh, you should be able to.
Oh, yeah, because the bar's in the way. Can I just
move yeah.
The bar's in the way of me pressing play. How do I?
I'm gonna see if I can find this. Okay, go left.
And how do I move the bar?
I don't know. You could. You know what? You could unshare, start your slideshow, and then reshare it. Let's see if that'll work.
Okay, hang on. Right, sorry about this. One
That's
second.
okay.
I can't press the play bit because it's not there.
Because it was too high up. Yeah, I saw it.
Okay, right. Oh, no, because now I'm not...
I take it.
Right, there we go.
There we go. All right, now can you press play? Yeah, you got it.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Right, perfect. Sorry about that. Right, okay. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about recognizing the ideal hoof and how we can do this objectively. Because the reality is that hoof balance has been shown to be a really, really important factor in lameness and catastrophic injury. But the reality is that there's quite a low recognition, both by owners and professionals, of the external reference points that can be used to assess hoof balance. In the absence of radiographs. I mean, obviously, when you get to that stage, you're already worried about something, right? So there should be, we should all be assessing the hoof on a regular basis. And this actually was quantified by a study in 2000, Mansman et al. 2000, which actually quantified the lack of recognition of poor external hoof proportions. And the study found that only 10% of 50 randomly radiographed horses presented with radiographs that were considered normal. 40% of the horses were in a category that included inadequate caudal support and poor palmar angles. So that's a massive proportion of unseen poor balance. And the same study discussed how to enable preventative hoof care, that owners need to be made aware of any potential balance issues. So a tool to be able to show and assess balance can aid shoeing and aid that communication between farriers and owners and vets. And so I actually, considering this, went about trying to create something that enabled people to be able to have that communication with one another. So I'll talk about that a little bit as we go through as well. So it's just going to work. There we go. So yeah, so we're going to talk about how to assess the digit, because obviously that is what farriery has a kind of direct influence on. And of course, I think actually in the last talk that I did with you, talked about how that can then affect the rest of the body. But we're going to focus on how we actually assess the digit. Now, the digit is everything below the fetlock or the metacarpophalangeal joint. So this is what farriery has a direct effect on. Now here we can see the digit both externally and of course internally. So it's radiographically, it's the phalanges. We're looking at the proximal, middle, and distal phalanx. What's important to understand the difference between assessing externally and internally is that externally we only have two reference points. We have the pastern and the hoof. But internally, we're assessing three different bones, essentially. So we're assessing proximal phalanx, middle phalanx, and the distal phalanx. Now, what we see externally usually correlates pretty well with what we see internally. But the reality is that when there's an extra reference point, we can have quite big differences. And obviously there's massive differences if you have, laminitis and those kind of things. So radiographs are always really important, but we can tell a lot about what's going on inside from what we see outside. So we're going to mainly talking about looking at it from the outside. So before we talk about what to look for, we need to understand how important it is to look at the digit correctly in order to assess it properly. Because I see all sorts of photos from all sorts of angles trying to trying to ask people, is this a good foot, or is this good balance, or whatever? And the reality is you can't see anything unless you take the correct photos. Now, to really assess the digit completely accurately, there's obviously technology out there that uses lasers and stuff to line up. But the reality is that that's not practical or economical for most people in the field. So there are ways, and I've created this app to enable people to be able to do that. But coming back to photos, so White et al. 2008 tested the practicability, precision, and accuracy of the process of obtaining measurements of the horse's feet using photography. So they tested whether taking photos and assessing balance from a photograph was actually useful. And they indicated that photography and radiography may be used interchangeably. So the photographic technique that they tested included visually aligning the heel bulbs, as is done when you're taking an X-ray, and supporting the camera at the same level as the foot. So that's a really, really important piece of this puzzle, is that when we're taking photos of the foot, you can see me in this picture. You have to have both feet evenly loaded. You have to have the camera actually on the floor. And I actually put the camera lens on the bottom edge of the camera, and just make sure that you're 90 degrees to the digit. And when you do this, then this is where this study, White et al., said that assessing balance from there is equivalent, assuming there isn't other changes in the foot, to radiographs. So you can assess balance pretty accurately from that. But taking the photograph is really, really important that you do that correctly. Now, we can get some more accuracy by, you can see on the left here, by putting the foot up on a block, similar as you would, again, to taking X-rays. That just lifts the foot kind of up into more central within the camera. So that's even more accurate. But again, there's debate then as to whether you have to put the other foot on a block as well, which you should really technically, and then it starts to become time consuming and those kind of things. But the reality is that the more accurate we want to be, the more time we have to put into taking the photos. But for kind of documenting changes, for assessing the hoof balance on a day-to-day basis, as long as you've got both those limbs loaded and you take a photo in what can be, unfortunately, a slightly uncomfortable position, as you can see there, then you can get pretty accurate readings. Okay, so once we've taken that accurate photo, this is what we're kind of looking at. These are the areas of the foot that we want to be looking at. So we want to be looking at something that I'm sure most people have heard, hoof pastanaxis. But also there's some other things that we want to look at. We want to look at what I've called there the hairline pathway in blue. So if you follow along the coronet band and you follow the hairline, in an ideal, absolutely ideal foot, that should be perfectly straight. So if we can see the curve in this hairline pathway, which suggests already, even though this is a pretty good foot, this is one I shod, you can see, if anyone understands a little bit what they're looking at, it looks like a pretty decent foot. But if you look at the hairline pathway, we can actually see that it's starting to curl back at the heels. So that is telling us that there's a degree of prolapse of the back of the foot. So this hairline pathway is a really, really good indicator of the health of the back of the foot. So that's a really interesting thing to keep an eye on when you're looking at these photos. And then the other thing we want to look at is the heel angle, which is in light blue, versus the dorsal wall angle. So I'll talk a bit about that a little bit further on. And then in the hind foot mainly, if we drop a line from the back of the metatarsal, that's what I call the gravitational load line. And that kind of wants to drop down the back of the bulbs and then touch the back of the heel of the shoe. And that was another thing that we want to look at. So these are the things we want to look at. And then if we go on to the next slide, this tells us kind of some of the established studies and parameters that we want to look for when we're looking at that hoof. So what's important to understand when we're looking at the hoof and we're looking at the digit is we're not looking for exact numbers. Okay, so that's the thing, because people often say, oh, it should be 55 degrees, or it should be this degree or that degree. But the reality is that every horse is completely individual. So what we want to be looking at is proportions and relationships and angles of the digit rather than exact numbers. So we can see some of the established ideals here. So if we look at the hoof pastern axis, this is taken from O'Grady 2003, but this has been talked about in study after study after study after study. If we draw a line through the middle of the pastern, that should be close to, or the same angle as the dorsal hoof wall. So that creates a straight hoof pastern axis. I'll talk a little bit more about how to assess that easier in a minute. Another thing we want to look at is this. And this is what you can do this really nicely from a lateral photo. And again, the app that I created helps you to do this really, really easily. If you take a line from the front of the hairline to the back of the hairline and you split it into three, the intersection between the first third and the second third, it correlates with the center of rotation of the foot. And the center of rotation of the foot is obviously a really important anatomical position for creating biomechanics around. And I won't get into that too much today because we want to talk about assessing stuff. But so you can obviously
talking about the purple and the red lines here.
So the red line that goes along the hairline, and then you've got 1/3 of it back. You've got a line that goes to the floor.
Right.
Yeah. So that line that is going down correlates with the center of rotation of the foot. So that's the center of the distal condyle of the middle phalanx. So that's the bit that the hoof rotates around. So creating biomechanics around that point is been said by many, many studies to be really important. So, and then obviously many of these studies talk about there being a 50-50 split in front of and behind that line. So that's where you can see the purple line, or the darker blue line at the bottom should be 50% in front of that and 50% behind it. And if you take an accurate photo, it's quite easy to plot that, and then you can really objectively assess the balance in front of and behind that center of rotation. And that's obviously something that is hugely majored on when you take in radiographs, but this enables us to do it externally, which is really useful.
Right.
Now, there's also here, we've got the heel to toe height ratios, which you can see in the purple arrows. So this is the difference between the height of the hairline at the heel compared to the height of the hairline at the toe. Can you see the two purple arrows?
Yeah, and I think your pointer should work on the screen.
Oh, does it? Can you see that?
Yeah.
No.
There it is.
You can.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Right. Okay. So the purple arrow at the heel, so from the ground to the hairline at the heel compared to the ground to the hairline at the toe. So there's been different kind of numbers thrown at this, but if you look at the Dyson 2011 study, and they also cited an earlier study, Snow and Birdsall, I think all the way back to 1990, talk about there being a maximum of 3 to 1, so 3 heel heights to 1 toe height. Anything more than that suggests a collapsed heel, basically. So that's a really, really important number, is the amount of heel heights to your toe height, because that will also dictate whether or not you can achieve a straight hoof pastern axis, because that ratio is going to dictate how your hoof is orientated around that center of rotation joint, because obviously the less heel height, your hoof's going to come down this way. More heel heights, your hoof's going to. So that's a really, really important measurement to keep an eye on and to measure in the first place. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute, because 3 to 1, again, I don't like putting any kind of concrete numbers to a natural structure, because you're always going to have biodiversity, natural variation. But it is a good number to keep an eye on, because certainly I haven't seen any hoof that has more than 3 to 1 that can achieve a straight hoof pastern axis. But again, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But this Dyson 2011 study also talked about how the external assessment of the hoof can give a really, really good indication of both its morphology, but also its predisposition to pathology, because we know, again, that the proportions of the hoof and how that affects the digit alignment is linked to lameness and other issues. So this is why this is important to do. So what I'll do now is I'll look at each one of those different things in a little bit more depth. Okay, so hoof pastern axis. So it's pretty simple. Now we usually see hoof pastern axis measured like this. Obviously, a line's taken through the pastern and then through the hoof, which should be parallel to the hoof wall. So hoof pastern axis is the relationship between those two angles. So in an ideal, perfectly aligned hoof, you should have a completely straight line going through the two. That is quite rare, but we want to be as close to that as possible, really. If we've got, distinct changes in that angle, then we've potentially got an issue, and we certainly are predisposing to pathologies. Now, the problem when doing this is that casting a line accurately taken from the dorsal wall and then putting it into the middle of the hoof leaves room for kind of human error for when you're trying to get that line exactly parallel to the hoof wall. So this is where I start to introduce Hoof Map. So this is the app that I created. At the moment, it's on iPhone and the iStore, and we are in the process of creating the Android version. So if we look at what it enables us to do, so here we can see we're assessing the hoof pastern axis. So as I said, it's difficult to project that dorsal wall into the middle of the hoof without kind of changing it a little bit. So it's actually more accurate not to try and get those two lines continuous. And the reality is we don't actually need to do that. We just need to know what the angle of the pastern is and what the angle of the dorsal hoof wall is. So we just need to know the two angles. We don't need to have them necessarily completely lined up, although you can do that with Hoof Map if you wish. But this is just an easier way of doing it. So here we've got a before and after of me shoeing this particular foot. So we can see before we had a pastern angle of 57.5, and we had a dorsal wall angle of 42.98. So there's a huge discrepancy there in the angle of the pastern and the angle of the hoof. So this is going to hugely put strain on the deep digital flex tendon and predispose this horse to injury. And then afterwards, we've obviously matched them much closer. We've got 59 and 52. So this is where we see what's not ideal and what's much closer to the ideal. And so this is what we're looking for in terms of hoof pastern axis. And this on Hoof Map just makes it incredibly easy because it puts the angles there for you, and you can assess that really quite easily.
So basically, because I haven't explored your app, you take a picture of the horse's foot the way you described, getting right down on the ground with your camera closer to the ground, 90-degree angle to the foot, and then the app actually puts the measurements on it.
No, the app has templates that you overlay onto the image. So you just use your fingers and you slide the template onto the foot and you move it to where it needs to be, and then it will give you all the angles and all the readings.
Great. So it actually calculates the angles. You just have to overlay the
Yes,
template
yes.
and
So
get your line.
all the readings it gives you are reading where you've put the template.
Okay.
Yeah. So, right. And I mentioned before about the center of rotation, about this is a really, really important anatomical point for creating biomechanics around. So, of course, we had to put that into the app, and because it's a really, really important thing for people to be able to assess. And actually, when you start to use this template and start to put it on the foot, sometimes you can be quite shocked as how far out you actually are, and how much toe length you have compared to your heel base of support. So it really highlights it. And so this is a tool for farriers as well as owners, as well as physios, as anyone that's dealing with the horse, because what it does is, because it creates those numbers there that are objective measurements, it creates an ability for those different people to communicate with one another without being offensive.
Well,
because
so that was the next question. Is like, a horse owner gets the app and shoots pictures of the foot and takes it to their farrier. How do you tactfully tell your farrier he's been doing a poor job? I mean,
well, you don't. You just show them the numbers. So that's the point. The point is you show the numbers, and the numbers speak for themselves. And that. But also, this app is just as useful for the farriers to document their work.
I get that.
Document their work, document their changes, train their own eyes. But also, there's a lot of farriers struggling with, like, for instance, you can see in this image where I've put pads on the horse. And I put pads on because the horse has very, very low, weak heels. So, you know, that some farriers struggle to persuade their owners to spend the money to be able to fix an issue. But again, if that farrier can say, well, here, look at the numbers, it's a way of them having a tool in their box as well to express what they're seeing, and explain the importance of it. So the idea of it is to create a language, an objective language that can be used within the industry, that can save a lot of those awkward conversations. So I think it's brilliant.
No, I totally get it. And I think the minute you start putting a line on anything, and I find this with Surefoot when I'm trying to explain to people the changes I see, the minute you put a line on something, it gives you an objective perspective. And from there, you can see differences, because I think that the hardest thing for especially horse owners to see is to see what's going on. They just look at it as a foot. And so the minute you put a line on it, you can say, and there's 50% here or 20% here.
Yeah,
I think it's brilliant.
But it is very important that you use it correctly and you're accurate with your photos, because if you took this photo, if you look at the ground level between the two photos, you can see the ground is the same distance away. And we're kind of pretty much at the same angle and stuff like that. So, you know, if you need to be objective, and you need to be accurate in the way that you use it. It's only as anything really is only as accurate as the person using it, isn't it? Really. So, so unfortunately, even with the evidence-based templates, it still has limitations of human error in taking the photos, putting the templates on, and those kind of things. But used correctly, obviously, it can be an incredibly useful tool.
And someone's asking if it works with barefoot as well as shod horses.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I mean, obviously, you're looking at, certainly in terms of the base split here, which we're looking at here, you're obviously looking at different proportional values for the barefoot. Because in the barefoot, you can be anything between 60-40 through 50-50 to 40-60, depending on the slope of the pastern. Because the slope of the pastern dictates the angle of the hoof. So you have to. So don't go and take this app and put it on a barefoot and then see that it's 60-40 and go, oh, it needs to be 50-50, because if you try and create 50-50 on a foot that's supposed to be 60-40, you'll just get blood. So you have to understand what you're measuring and that. But yeah, absolutely, I use it on my bare feet. The biggest thing I actually use it for is when I'm transitioning from shoes into barefoot. So I use it to document the changes, because you see the changes in the heel height to toe ratios, you see the changes in the heel angle to toe angles, and all those kind of things. So I actually, in terms of for barefoot, I actually find it incredibly useful for measuring and documenting transition period.
Oh wait, I just lost my question. Oh yeah, I got it back. So, and maybe you're going to talk about this a little later on, and maybe I'm too soon with this question, but let me ask it anyway. You know, the measurements are going to give you numbers. And then of course we have to decide, then we measure that against what we consider to be ideal, but we still have to listen to the horse in terms of making those changes toward those quote unquote idle numbers, right? Because not every horse can actually, in fact, I've seen that with riders. I put them in the ideal spot and I cripple them. You know, I have to put them in the spot that they can manage.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, you have to, I mean, there's things like leverage testing and stuff like that you can do on the feet to make sure that if you lift those heels up, for instance, that the horse is happy with it. And so there's a communication that needs to go on after you've taken these measurements. But personally, like for instance, with this horse, I when I saw what I saw on the left, there was no question for me that what I created on the right was going to create a more comfortable horse, and without a doubt it's completely changed the horse, and for the most part there's very few horses in my experience anyway that don't like a positive change toward the ideal. So but anyways, going back to this, we can see, for instance, on this one, the base split, we can see that there's a 68 toe to a 32 heel, and then we've got a 59 to 41 from there. But also, interestingly, we measure, when you put the coronet line on there, it measures the angle of the coronet, because this is, in my recent study, actually, that I did for my degree, I found that the average of the coronet angle correlated with negative plantar angles. So that will obviously come out when hopefully the paper gets published. But the angle on the left is 33, and I think off the top of my head, the average angle for NPA was above 27 or 28. But don't take that as a figure. But that just, the point is that when we do further research, these numbers are also going to mean more to us as we start to correlate them with things going on internally. But this coronet angle is anecdotally, obviously for a long time as well, has been an important measurement for negative plantar angles. And if you project that line towards the front limb, ideally it should land around about the carpus, and obviously this particular hind on the left was going right up into the horse's kind of girth area. So that is
just so that we're clear. Maybe you can use your pointer. Because the numbers are a little hard to read. The red.
Yeah, they are a bit blurry because that's the photo of a photo.
Right. No, I get it. That's where your pointer can be handy. So when we're talking about that angle on the left, it's, what is it, 33.3?
33.3. So this angle, it follows the coronet, follows the hairline.
Okay.
And this angle in my study correlated with severity of the broken back alignment, and horses with negative plantar angles had on average, I forget the number now, but had a much higher average of this coronet angle. So it has some correlation to negative plantar angles as well. So it's quite an important thing to kind of look at, is the angle of, this is the hind foot in the hind kind.
And the angles, you're measuring that angle, but I'm slightly unclear. This is where I was not the best in geometry. So that 90 is vertical, right? It's a T.
Yeah.
So from where are we measuring that 33.5 degrees?
So all the angles on Hoof map are off of ground parallel.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So it says 26 degrees to the ground, or from off the ground, if that makes sense.
Great. So you're basically extrapolating the line to the ground and using the ground as your other side of your triangle. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So there's a question here, and I'm not sure I understand the question. It says, I'm clear if the heel is 2 inches, the toe would be 6 inches, but I don't think you've talked about inches. So
no, I haven't talked about inches. I've talked about ratios.
Got it.
So it's the height of the heel. You should have. Well, I'll talk about it a bit more in a minute, actually. Okay. But it's the ratio of the heel to the toe, not in terms of an actual measurement.
Right. And then, of course, you'd have to measure every hoof because every hoof could be different. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I talk more about that later on, so we can go on to that in a bit. Okay. Hit the ratios. Okay. So, right. And then, of course, I talked about the center of rotation then, how important the center of rotation is. And we can, of course, map the center of rotation from a solar view before we shoe, or if we don't, obviously, you can measure where the center of rotation is in terms of heel to toe. Now, balance around this point, as I said earlier, has been stated as being optimal for hoof balance. Dr. Caldwell, in his PhD, discussed, summarized and tested the importance and the accuracy of external reference points, such as Duckett's dot. I'm sure many people have heard of Duckett's dot. Duckett's dot, you can see, is the green dot there at the apex. And he also tested the external center of rotation achieved by this foot mapping. And Caldwell again discussed that Duckett's theory, stating that balance was theoretically achieved by way of proportional measurements. So again, we want to measure proportions around that point, which tells us a bit about the hoof balance. The study found that the external center of rotation, which you can see as the red dot in the middle of like the crisscross, the red crisscross, that correlated very well with the internal center of rotation. So you can see on the solar mapping there on the left, that a red dot correlates with the red line in the radiograph on the right-hand side. So that mapping system was shown to be very accurate in locating the center of rotation. Again, there's been lots and lots of studies that have talked about the importance of creating balance around that point. Now, again, if you look at the bottom right, so this is, again, our template. So the reality is when we put a shoe on, we can't see some of the important points that we need to map the center of rotation from the sole. So we can't see the end of the buttress. We can't see the inside of the white line if you've got a shoe on there. So this is where, once the horse is shod, assessing it from the lateral view becomes easier to do and more accurate, because we know that this 1/3 of the hairline, as long as you're 90 degrees to the foot, etc., also correlates with that center of rotation. So that's where, when you're shod, you're more likely to want to use that lateral marker than on your sole. Having said that, mapping the sole is what you want to use for when you're going to be putting the shoe on, because you want to achieve 50-50. But also, if we have a shoe on there, we can. So the widest point of the shoe should technically correlate with the widest point of the foot, right? If it's been fitted correctly. So in that sense, you can still use that crisscross to kind of gauge, or if you literally go across the widest point, because if you go across the widest point that of the sole, that correlates with Duckett's bridge as well, which is also the center of rotation. So you can still have an assessment when you're shod, because you can see where that widest point of the shoe is. But that takes practice, so it's more accurate to do it laterally.
So in other words, sole mapping is a great thing to do, but the minute you put a shoe on, it's harder to do. And your app actually, if you take a good picture, can give us similar information.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So hoof mapping is brilliant to do in the process of shoeing. But once that shoe's on there, looking at the base of the foot is not as accurate as looking from the side of the foot as to ascertain if you've got that balance.
Right.
Okay. So now I actually, because before we made the app, I wanted to double check that this template actually worked and actually gave us the point that we needed. So this is an open access paper that I wrote, which it was published in, I wanted it to be really easily accessible. So it's published in the Forge magazine, and you can read it on my website as well. But basically, I tested the template. I took, I think it was between 20 and 30 x-rays. I overlaid the template onto the x-ray and I measured how far the template center of rotation was from the actual center of rotation. And I found that there was a 95% statistical equivalence. So basically it's pretty accurate, which obviously fit in with the previous studies that suggested it in the first place. But I wanted to obviously double check that the template was accurate. So I did that myself. Right, so back to sole mapping. We do, of course, have on the app also the ability to map the sole. So on the left, we can see, these are templates that you can use that are in the app to map the sole from a photo. So obviously in real life, you're going to draw on it or whatever, but you can map solar pictures of the foot with the app as well. And again, coming back to the hoof and using these two different techniques, we can, as I was saying before about the widest point of the shoe should really correlate with the widest point of the foot and the sole. So we can use this template, which is in the app again, to kind of get a relatively accurate assessment of the balance around that center of rotation, but obviously not completely accurate because again, we can't see those reference points, but we can still get a good idea. So if you look at this shoe, you can see the widest point of the shoe correlates with the green line. And then what happens is you put the template at the heels, you put the template at the toe, and then you move the green line up and down, and it will change the percentages. So you put that green line where you think the center of rotation is.
And I would think once again, taking a good picture of a sole would be really important. Like
absolutely, it's always subject to taking accurate photos. But then that's the same with radiographs. If you have an oblique radiograph, you can't measure anything. So it's exactly the same. The image acquisition is probably the most important part of the whole process.
Yeah.
So we can't highlight that enough, really. Right, so we talked about heel to toe height ratio. So I did another study myself on heel to toe height ratios because I saw this 3:1 ratio. So I wanted to check it out really and see if it was actually accurate. So basically I did this on my barefoot horses because I wanted to take that variable out of the picture. And I wanted to take my barefoot horses that had pretty much straight hoof pastanaxes. So, a close to ideal digit. And then I wanted to measure those heel to toe height ratios and angle differences to see if, 3:1 was a number to always use or what was actually going on. And obviously, as I've talked about before, if you look at these hairlines, they're all pretty straight from front to back. So again, I knew that these caudal hooves were relatively in a good state. So these were going to be relatively accurate measurements for the ideal. So what's also really interesting here is that these were 3 different breeds. And I mean, I did it on a lot more horses, but these are the ones I've used in this example. And the thoroughbreds, you know, we always talk about thoroughbreds have low heels, long toes, this, that, and the other. But actually, if you took the titles off of there and you didn't know what breeds they were, you'd have a hard time recognizing which one was the thoroughbred, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So the reality is that, and I'm not going to get into it too much, but I've done other webinars on that and articles on that. But the thoroughbred feet are not actually. They may have a more acute angle, but they're not supposed to be as flat and low, weak heels as what we see. That comes down to the fact that they have a weaker composition. But again, I won't get too much into that because that's another whole thing. But coming back to this study. So we can see the one on the left, the Barb, he had a heel to toe ratio of just under 3-1. The one in the middle had a heel to toe ratios of just greater than 2-1. And the thoroughbred had a similar ratio. So I found that there was a variation, obviously, in the heel to toe height ratios that would still create a near straight alignment. But they were all around this 2-1 to 3-1. And certainly there was nothing over 3-1 that had a near straight hoof pastern axis. So I do think that a 3-1 can be taken as a pretty good indicator of the maximum that is kind of getting towards unacceptable. But this just shows we can't put an exact number on it, because the same 3-1 ratio on the thoroughbred, in this instance, would have created a broken back alignment. Mm-hmm. So you know, it's very individual to the horse. So what becomes the common denominator is, for me, a near straight hoof pastern axis. So that's what becomes the kind of dictates whether the others are near ideal, really. And then, so you can look at the heel to toe angles here as well. So if we think back to that Dyson study, they talked about a 5-degree difference was an indication of collapsed heels. But actually, I found here we can see there was a maximum of 7-degree difference. And I've actually seen horses with up to 10 degrees difference that still have a relatively straight hoof pastern axis and pretty good hoof proportions. So that's a number that needs more research. But coming back to the common denominator, if you have a wildly broken back hoof pastern axis, it's a pretty good indication that the angle between the heel and the toe and the heights between the heels and the toes is not acceptable.
So if I understand you correctly, then with this Barb, he has a much more slopey pastern, which is going to affect the hoof pastern angle, and therefore you can't just go by a number. You have to look and go, this horse has a different slope to his pastern. It's going to be a ratio.
Yeah, and that's also going to dictate the slope of that pastern is going to dictate the heel to toe height ratio, the heel to toe angle ratio, and the bare foot split around the center of rotation. All of those are going to be affected by the angle of the pastern. So this is where we really have to appreciate the conformation of the particular horse and bear that all in mind.
Well, and that leads me to, horses that have disease with their pasterns really drop. That's going to really mess things up, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So that's where you get onto more complex cases, obviously. But as a general rule, we want to be looking for a relatively straight hoof pastern axis.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, so of course, I use these ratios and angle differences. I put them in the app because if it's something that I want to measure, it's something that went in the app, right? So we have on the left, we have the toe angle compared to the heel angle. And on the right, we have the ratio. So the app, this template actually gives you the ratio of heel to toe height. So this horse has just under 2 heel heights to 1 toe height. Yeah. So it's a really, really quick, because you can imagine the nightmare of trying to work out heel to toe height ratios if you're measuring it with a ruler and adding, subtracting, dividing, all this. You just stick the template on there and it tells you. But but what's important, and what I want to kind of drum home, is that just because this is 1 to 1.99 and another horse might be 1 to 2.99, doesn't mean it's wrong or right. But what it does give you is it gives you a tool to document changes and to make assessments of all the numbers together and kind of make an overall assessment of your balance, with kind of, again, hoof pastern axis being like for me anyway, a common denominator. So these are more documenting tools, really, for, if you come back to this horse next time and you've gone from 1 to 1.99 to 1 to 1.5, for instance, to 2.5, then you're going the wrong way. So you've got to then go, oh, why are we going the wrong way? Why is this heel to toe height ratio got worse? Why is this heel to toe angle got worse, etc., etc. Yeah. So it enables preventative action if you're documenting the feet, the proportions of the foot. So that's where it becomes really useful for communicating as well. So the farrier documents these changes and says, oh, we're going the wrong way. We might need to think about why. We might need to make some proactive interventions here to stop this from getting any worse. And vice versa, obviously, for the owner, for the vet, farrier, whatever. It just creates that ability to communicate earlier.
It brings up a really good point, because so often it's like over time you see things starting to change, and my classic example is I watched my farrier go through a divorce, and as he went through the divorce, he got worse and worse. But with an app like this, you could actually document it and show them and go, hey, maybe we need to get back to what we did before.
Yeah, and like you say, often these changes are insidious, aren't they? They're slow and they're progressive. Yeah. So sometimes you come back and go, oh, is it better or worse? Is it worse? Well, I don't need to guess. I'll put this on it, and then I know if it's better or worse, and then we can make an objective decision. And so that's where it really changes the game.
Has anybody started using this app in a pre-purchase exam?
I'm sure people have. I mean, I wouldn't. I don't know of any, but
it's just an interesting thought, because the more data we can collect on a horse before we buy it, the better off we are.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you have to factor in other things like hoof growth, shoeing style. Has the horse actually got bad feet, or is it just there's loads of other factors then that you have to consider. Okay, now a lot of these ratios that I'm talking about, the heel to toe height ratio, the heel to toe angle ratio, all of these things affect hoof pastern axis, and all of these things come down to having a healthy back of the foot. So being able to recognize a healthy back of the foot is really, really important for us to be able to do. So let's start with the frog. So in the frog, obviously, is in the red triangle. So according to studies, the frog should be around 50 to 60% as wide as it is long. And it should have a shallow central sulcus, and it should be pretty symmetrical in shape. So let's move on to the bars. So the bars, now I know there's some teachings that remove bars and stuff like that. The bars have their own corium. The body wouldn't put a corium there for something that it didn't need, right? So the bars have a very important role to play in the function of the foot, for structure and for the hemodynamic system as well. If we look at Bowker's third theory of hemodynamics, you can watch another webinar for that. But they have an important role to play, and so they should be straight, healthy, and they should usually terminate around the center of rotation as well. But we need to look after the bars. You can see here, when I trim a foot, I like to sculpt them and to shape them and to create something of them, because they do have an important role to play. Now, and then we have the heels themselves. Now, if you look at these heels are nice and solid. They have like a triangular shape to them. They've actually got a flat platform, and they're substantial. So that, you know, and they in the very, very ideal hoof, they should end at the highest, widest part of the frog. Obviously, you can have the different deformations of the foot. The ELPO, the Equine Lameness Prevention Organisation, have a really nice chart for measuring these deformations. I haven't got that on here, but it's a really nice chart if anyone wants to look that up. But the heel should look something like this. So being able to recognize, and more importantly, not ignore the caudal hoof structures, will help us to maintain better hoof proportions, to maintain all of the proportions that we've just spoken about. Now, unfortunately, the reality is what we saw in the last image is pretty rare. Certainly in the shod population that I see. Now, obviously, I'm a second opinion referral farrier, so I might perhaps see worse feet than the general population. But even so, when I just go to places, you know, I see frogs with deep sulci, contracted heels, you know, all sorts of, you know, contracted bulbs, etc. So if you look at the frog on the top right, so if we bear in mind the frog should be 50 to 60% as wide as it is long, that's got to be 4 times as long as it is wide, right? Yeah. So the reality is that this is probably what people are more used to seeing, unfortunately. Now, interestingly, the bottom 2 pictures on the left is a foot that I took out of shoes. On the right is the same foot 6 weeks later. Wow. And you can see the changes in morphology. So with that, I invite you to watch again some of my other webinars, because I don't want to get into it too much today, because I go on for hours about it. But this just really highlights the importance of a functioning back of the foot, and a back of the foot that's engaged, because use it or lose it, basically. But I've done webinars on the hemodynamic system. I've written articles on the hemodynamic system, how important it is for the health of the foot. And it's because of this. It's because with a bad functioning back of the foot creates these deformations. And these deformations are going to affect the ratios that we've just spoken about, because those ratios can't be ideal if the back of the foot is not ideal. So that's where we need to start really looking and recognizing the back of the foot. And that brings us on to looking at the back of the foot from this angle as well. So because the lateral cartilages, the digital cushion, the position of all those can tell us a lot about the health of the foot as well. So in an ideal foot, you should have 2 symmetrical lateral cartilages that take up about 1/3 of the foot each. And you should have a nice, plump, thick digital cushion in the middle of them, taking up all of that central 1/3 gap. Now, again, the reality is that if you're seeing feet like this, you're not going to see 2 symmetrical lateral cartilages with a nice deep digital cushion, etc. So we're more likely to see contracted cartilages or no cartilages or weak you know, all those kind of things. So looking at the back of the foot is often something that doesn't get done, but actually tells you an awful lot about the health of the foot. So it's something that we need to start doing and recognizing the healthy versus unhealthy. Now, going back to hoof map, we can make certain assessments of these parameters again. So if you look at this hoof, you can see that it's very asymmetrical. The lateral cartilages are nothing like each other. They're completely different angles of each other. The foot has different widths through the middle of the frog. So again, these are things that you can measure with the tools in Hoof Map and document the changes. So hopefully you do something with this foot. Next time you'll have different readings and you can document those changes.
Does the app actually keep the picture with the measurements from the previous time? Does it store it?
Yeah, so what it does is you create a file for each horse with their name, any notes, all those kind of things. You take a photo, it goes into that horse's file and gets stored in that file. And then everything for that horse is in the file, dated and everything like that.
Somebody's asking if it works with composite shoes or Epona shoes. I would think it wouldn't matter what's on the foot.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's a measuring tool. It's a tool for measuring balance proportions of whatever, you know. Actually, it's interesting because Dr. Gillian Tabor, who I've done a few webinars with, she's a physio. She's also very big on objective measurements. And she actually wrote her PhD on objective measurements for physiotherapy. Okay. And she actually said that many of these tools are very useful for objectively measuring the horse, let alone the foot, because basically they're proportional measurements, angular measurements, and those kind of things, which you can measure whatever you want with. Obviously, we have specific one, you know, they're designed for purpose for the foot, but they can be used for anything. So, you know, you can measure, I don't know, measure sofa if you want, but it's, you know, it's the point is it gives you proportional and angular measurements. So yeah, right. And then obviously, you know, we see these medial lateral imbalances, which we just saw in that last picture. We also want to measure coronet angles, the angles from side to side, measuring those. So again, you know, pretty obviously, we want to have a pretty symmetrical hoof with a straight coronet band. So that's another measurement that we can take. The reality is that if all the measurements from the back and from the underneath are not correct, you know, more than likely this isn't going to be ideal either. But basically, I come up with a kind of general rule, and I think Dr. Caldwell says this a lot as well. He says, if it looks right, it probably is right, and if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't right. So, you know, humans are kind of drawn to symmetry and although nature's not perfect, and we're going to have asymmetry. Asymmetry is a perfectly natural thing. It's a normal thing in nature. Gross asymmetries that are very visible to the human eye are usually pathological. So, and then we quickly come on to x-rays, because inevitably, if we have poor hoof balance for a long period of time, we're probably going to end up with lameness issues, and usually with lameness issues comes radiographic assessment. And so obviously we threw into the app tools for measuring radiographic markers as well. So we've got these little green circles with dots that you can put on your sensors of rotation. You can measure the palmar angle, and then again you can measure the hoof, the base split, and you can also measure the differences in the angles of the phalanges. So I'm not going to get into too much into that, because really you want to be discussing these things with vets. So I'm not going to get into that too much, but again, it's a useful tool for farriers, for vets, well, for anyone really, for assessing podiatry parameters from radiographs. So in the ideal, as we talked about in the externally, so I talked about the difference externally and internally. Externally, we want a relatively straight hoof pastern axis, so the relationship between the pastern and the hoof. Internally, we want to have a relatively straight line of axis between the phalanges. So if you look on the right, you can see the proximal phalanx is at 67, middle's at 56, and the distal is at 43. So in an absolute ideal, you'd have the same angle going all the way through those. Now, again, the absolute ideal is extremely rare. But again, if we have, gross differences, then, we are shown by study after study, we are predisposed to injuries. Now, talking about the palmar angle or plantar angle, which you can see I've measured there. So that's the angle of the bottom of the pedal bone. What I want to drum home and use that as an example to drum home the point is that we're not measuring, although it gives you exact measurements, those exact measurements are not something that you can't dictate an exact angle for anything. Okay, you can't. So coming back to the hoof angle, you can't say all horses should have a 55-degree hoof angle. And historically in textbooks, that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
They say front hoof should be this, hind hoof should be that. Horses there's biodiversity, there's natural variation. They're all going to have different hoof angles, pastern angles, etc., etc. Now, coming back to the palmar angle, it's really important that we understand that the same way that a near straight hoof pastern axis becomes the common denominator for those other measurements, a near straight phalangeal alignment becomes the common denominator for the correct plantar angle or palmar angle. Because if we have two horses that pluck a number out of the sky, should have a 50-degree hoof angle in order to have a near straight hoof pastern axis, but one of them has a 45-degree bone angle, he only needs a 5-degree palmar angle to achieve 50-degree hoof angle. Another horse might have a 40-degree bone angle, in which case, to have the same 50-degree hoof angle, that horse needs a 10-degree palmar angle. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the hoof angle is created by the bone angle plus the palmar angle, creates the angle of the hoof.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So, but horses can have different bone angles. So different bone angle would dictate a different palmar angle because to achieve the same hoof angle. So this is where, although we can measure palmar angle, we can measure palmar angle, just because it has a 5-degree palmar angle, which is a number that's thrown out there a lot for the ideal, doesn't mean that that's ideal for that horse, because that horse could need to have a 10-degree palmar angle for its conformation. So again, we have to be careful not to put exact numbers when we're trying to assess these balance parameters and these angles. We need to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is mechanics of the whole digit that look after the soft tissues.
Right.
And that comes down again, I've done webinars on this as well, talking about the importance of phalangeal alignment. That's actually a free webinar that you can watch on YouTube. And I talk about it with Dr. Myers and Sylvia Corner. We talk about the importance of phalangeal alignment. So for me, straight hoof pastern axis and a near straight phalangeal alignment becomes the common denominator for these measurements.
So bottom line, line up the bones and things are going to fall into place.
Yeah, I think, we have to think about these things as, from a mechanical point of view, mechanics, basic mechanics. They're levers and pulleys. And if you extend the lever, then you strain a pulley.
Right.
So
I like what's going on in these pictures.
Yeah, exactly. So basically it comes down to the fact that if we have poor balance parameters and we don't recognize them, then we're leading to pathologies throughout the whole digit, but also this has a knock-on effect into the whole horse.
Yeah.
So assessing the hoof is not just about looking after the hoof or the digit, but it's about looking after the entire animal. And these radiographs on the bottom, courtesy of Wayne Turner, friend of mine, Progressive Equine. These are the kind of bone alignments that we want to be seeing, right? So there's nearly a straight line going through compared to the ones on the top, where you have almost a right angle between the proximal phalanx and the distal phalanx, and we actually have negative plantar angles there. So, and again, what we see externally is going to give us a very, very good indication of what's going on internally. So that's where taking these photos, regularly assessing the hoof and making these kind of documentations and monitoring the hoof becomes very important for, well, looking up, looking after the horse, basically. So
yeah, because the horse on the top there, I'm sure that all your red arrows are all the places that horse is going to feel strain based on that foot.
Yeah, exactly, and that actually comes from my my degree study. These are all points that were proven to be affected by poor hind hoof proportions. So yeah, so it affects the horse all the way through its body.
Yep.
So that's me. So
cool. All right. So I have a question for you, because how long have you been doing mapping like this now?
I've been doing it for a few years, but I found it's very difficult to do without the app. Was the reality, because what I was having to do is I was having to take photos, and then I was having to go home, upload it onto the computer, put it into PowerPoint, for instance, and then draw all these lines on it with PowerPoint to get, and then I was having to take a protractor.
Oh God!
And right, so I thought, right, enough of this. Actually, it was a friend of mine and partner in the hoof map, Mitchell Wood, who came to me and said, we need an app for measuring hoof balance. And he had these particular templates, which I changed to be more in line with what was scientific evidence based, according to the studies, and that's where we created Hoof Map, because we were both fed up of the whole rigmarole of trying to objectively assess our hooves and our digits without having something that was quick and easy and practical to use. Like I said earlier, there are products out there. I won't mention them because I don't think it's fair to do that. There are products out there that are more accurate, because they line things up with lasers and stuff like that. But the reality is that massively restricts who can use it, how often you use it, how practical it is, and how instant it is, as well, because these things need to be loaded into computers and stuff like that.
So just from a practical perspective, having the app has decreased the amount of time it's taken you to analyze a foot, one.
Yeah.
But it also allows you to do that in real time, standing next to an owner. Exactly.
I take the photo. So I turn up to a job and I say, oh, I don't like the look of our proportions. And they go, oh, really? And I can go, yeah, take a photo there and then. Yeah, this is where we're at, So it's that instantaneous, practical usefulness of it, that enables you to have that proactive discussion there and then,
right?
Which can be a game changer, really.
So it's really a field app, if you will. It's
absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And the reality is that yes, you do lose a little bit of accuracy with a field app, but what you gain is instant gratification, and you gain the ability to make decisions there and then with the client and those kind of things.
I was going to say, in compliance, where you're not trying to convince them, you can show them so that you're educating them at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
They understand what's going on with their horse. So since you've had the app, what's the most profound discovery that you've made? What is it? How has it changed your life?
I think the biggest thing is it came as part of another journey. So it's difficult to know which one kind of affected which, if that makes sense. But
what was the other journey?
Well, just recognizing how much poor hoof balance there is. Really, was kind of that created the app, but at the same time, the app kind of cemented that recognition of just how, if you go back to that Dyson 2011 study and other studies, the reality is that poor hoof proportions are more common than good hoof proportions. And that's been shown by science.
Well, and what happens is that people get used to seeing something and stop recognizing it as pathological or not good.
Exactly. And if we go back to what I said right at the beginning, that was shown by that study all the way back in 2000, Mansman et al., that said that there is actually quantified the lack of recognition. Was that they took random horses, radiographed them, and 40% of them had really quite poor hoof proportions that wasn't recognized, and that's a reality. And I think it's great. The number's greater than that, in all honesty. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is get a hoof in a better balance so that we don't wind up down the road with tendon failure or back pain or poor performance or all the other things that no foot, no horse. It goes right back down. Absolutely. But in order to do that, you need to recognize that you're in the wrong place, that you're not there, and objectively, rather than say, oh, the toes look a bit long. Farriers get offended because somebody comes along and says, oh, the hoof balance is not very good, or you've got a long toe. They get that because that is offensive. But if you say, well, hang on, this is what the numbers are saying, then it creates a more objective language that's more engaging. And you can start to have a conversation. As long as you're that way inclined, anyway.
No, it's great. Somebody's asking if it's available for Android.
We not yet. It is being built as we speak, and we're hoping for it to be ready by end of March. So not long, hopefully.
Somebody's asking if there's a relationship between, and this is kind of off topic a little bit, but ECVM and high-low.
Between what, sorry?
ECVM, equine complex vertebral malformation, and horses with high-low. Kind of off topic.
Well, the reality is probably, but I don't know. I don't think the study's been done yet. I don't like to I don't like to spout anecdotal stuff. I like to see numbers and papers. So probably.
You're great. You keep it back to the data. How many horses can you track in the app?
That's a question I have to ask the developers, but I've got hundreds in there. So I would think that it's if your phone can hold the data, I'm sure it's not. I think that's pretty much it. And we are working on updates. So we're working on the ability to extract the files to send to vets and this kind of stuff. So there's lots of things in the pipeline as well. So we're going to be improving and building on it as well. So I'm really excited for it.
Somebody's asking if you can identify syncing with this. I think you have to define
radiographically, possibly no. Okay, so they mean founder. They mean when the bone is sunk in the hoof capsule. You need radiographs to do that. and you need to have markers on the hoof capsule in order to do that. So if you're going through all of that, you might as well have the vet mark it up with their on the radiograph. So
and this question,
I mean, I'm sure.
Oh, go ahead. Didn't mean.
I'm sure that there's a way you can, like, for instance, the other day I used the heel to toe height ratio. I used that to test the difference in dorsal wall thicknesses and a laminetic, which worked really well. So so you can use the measurements for whatever you want to put them to, but you need to have the right markers on the foot. So if you're going through all that, you might as well get the vet to
take x-rays. This is a question that I really think is I'm going to ask it, but it doesn't really fit. Okay. It says my barefoot Frisian tends to get split in the center of his front hoof. Is that because his breakover point is incorrect? Is it sufficient for the farrier to rasp off some toe to alleviate the problem? And I think I kind of know what your answer is going to be.
Yeah, I don't have enough information. I need to see the foot, really.
But you could use the app to look at the foot to figure out if.
You can certainly you can assess balance with the app. But there's other things at play there. There could be, you could have CD toe, you could have underlying white line disease, you could have, it depends if it's coming from top to bottom or bottom up, because you could have a damage to the coronet band. So I need to see the crack and I'd need to get some more info. But very often, yes, cracks are caused by leverage. So possibly, but I would need to see the foot to really answer that.
Great. All right, let's go ahead and have you unshare your screen and we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
This has been really interesting. So one of the things that I wanted to mention to everybody is that right now you are planning to be in the United States in April.
That's right. Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about what that's going to be all about?
So I'm coming over to do 2 conferences. One is in, okay, now let me get this right, Ipswich.
Yes.
Yes, Ipswich. That's for the humble hoof. And I'm going to be talking about posture and hoof morphology, I believe. But I'm going to be doing a demo shoeing to x-rays. And then I'm going to be talking at the Rood and Riddle conference in Lexington, which is going to be fantastic. It's going to be an absolute honor to talk there, especially who I'm talking alongside, which is going to be Renat Weller and Thilo Fowl, which obviously are 2 legends of the industry. So I'm very, very honored to be speaking at that. And I'm going to be doing 4 hours of lectures and demos there. I'm going to be talking about the hoof horse connection. And that's where I'm going to be exclusively sharing my whole degree study.
Awesome. That's really exciting. So it turns out that when you come over here, I'm supposed to head over to the other side of the pond to go to Equine.
No.
I know. I'm like, I can't be in 3 places. There's 3 to 4 different events on the exact same weekend right now. It looks like I'll be going to Equitana because I have demos and things to do there. But if for whatever reason that doesn't happen, you're my next choice is to come.
Well, hopefully COVID lets us go anywhere anyway. So
yeah, I exactly. It's like you make plans, but you always have a caveat on them these days.
Well, I'm supposed to be in Cyprus doing a clinic in February, and then Madrid in March. But who knows? Like you just don't know, do you?
No, like I said, you have to make plans, but you have to be ready for the plans to change.
Exactly.
So I'll be at Hoof Summit actually the end of this month. We go every year.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
We have a booth. Yeah. So someday you'll probably be there too.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. It's a bit expensive to pop over the pond for that, but I'll definitely come one day. Maybe they'll ask me to speak and then it'll be cheaper.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. They should ask you to speak and that would be great. But Yogi, this has been great. I really enjoy listening to what you've developed here. And I think it's a fantastic tool to just help bridge that gap between what's really going on and what we can't see. So often what I find is when I look at a foot, I'm like, I'm not sure that that's really what I want to look at, but I can't tell you, because the foot is such an interesting shape. It's not, conceptually for me, it's a difficult shape. I've been trimming my horses for years, and yet I still look at that foot and go, do I understand this?
Yeah.
So it's really fantastic that you put some numbers to it. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us about your hoof.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me again.
Yep.
Enjoyed it.
All right. Well, hopefully one of these days we'll catch up and see each other in person. In the meantime, just remember, everybody, you can find this and all the other webinars on the Surefoot Equine YouTube channel. We'll get it posted up there pretty soon. And thanks everybody for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Yogi. Bye.
Bye.